Hi, my name is Tanaz Bhathena, and I'm the author of Hunted by the Sky. I'm really excited to be a part of the Telling Tales Festival today, and I'm going to be reading a short excerpt from my book, followed by an interview with some students who have read it. So, without further ado, let me begin. This book is about a girl who is seeking vengeance against a tyrant king for ordering the murder of her parents. And this excerpt begins shortly after her parents have died and she's hiding in a stable of a wealthy landowner. The wealthiest landowner in Lokal has gray hair, a greasy smile, and teeth that shine yellow in the light of the furnace he holds over his head, flames dancing in the lantern's clear glass confines. I peer at Zamindar Mulchan through the window next to the Jwalian mare's stall, watching him talk to three traveling women who have asked to spend the night. Anand Pranam, the happiest of salutations. Even with his palms respectfully joined, Zamindar Mulchan makes the ancient greeting sound perverted. Be my guests for the night, ladies. Sate your hunger with my bread. My home is your home. So abhar, Zamindar, says the tallest of the women. 100 thank yous. Another woman might have added the common tongue honorific, G, perhaps even delivered the greeting flirtatiously. This woman doesn't, even though she smiles, her deep brown skin glowing in the moonlight. The pallu of her simple homespun sari slides down her head, revealing streaks of blue in her midnight hair. Ma once told me that it's the sort of blue that can't be covered up with soot or the oil from a jatamansi plant or magic, the mark of someone from the seafaring kingdom of Samudra. The sight of it makes Zamindar Mulchan's unctuous smile slip. My father married a woman from Samudra before the Great War, the woman says now. She died when I was a baby. She speaks our language perfectly, her Vani smooth, the accent crisp and airy. It holds no trace of the sea. We are headed back from Sur, where one of my daughters had a baby. The Zamindar would do us poor women a big favor by offering us a place in his stable for the night. The Zamindar turns his attention to the other sari-clad figures. One has shielded herself from his gaze, tucking her pallu like a whale over her mouth and nose. The other, a pretty, pale-skinned young woman, looks unperturbed by his leer. Why don't I offer you and your friends more comfort? He says. I have 5 guest bedrooms. It can get lonely in this big old house. We prefer the stable. A hint of steel cuts through the quiet deference in the older woman's voice. Our horses are tired. We need to ensure they are well rested. She stares at the Zamindar until he averts his head and nods. I duck behind a bale of hay in Agni's stall as Mulchan opens the door to the stable, letting in the women. What a lech, a voice says. It's the veiled woman, no, a girl, who finally uncovers her face, revealing dark, surma-lined eyes and skin like fine copper. Like her companions, the girl's hair is bound in a braided bun. Unlike the other two, she wears a square amulet tied around her upper arm, marking her as a follower of the Prophet Zal. She appears to be a few years older than me. I thought I'd have to strip him naked and hang him upside down from the roof of his stupid Haveli. The pale girl snorts. Like what you did to that safflower merchant last year for calling you his little flower bouquet? Seriously, Amira. Don't give me that look, Cully. You were a few seconds away from slicing him up like an onion with your daggers. A pause before they both burst into giggles. Enough, you two. The older woman cuts in. I don't want to have to modify the memories of an entire household again. Sky warriors were at this village a few days ago. I still see traces of their magic against the trees outside. As the girls murmur apologies, I think of the stories I heard growing up, of women with shadowy faces and daggers glinting in their hands, women who wear their saris like fisherfolk, who knock down doors and slash into enemies with knives and swords and spells. The Sisterhood of the Golden Lotus. And that is it for the excerpt. Now over to the students.
Oh, I really like the main character, Gull. And I was wondering, like, if I ever wrote a book, I would portray the main character to have characteristics like me. Did you do the same?
Gul is not like me at all. So I am completely different. She is, I think, also because of the way her life has
Yeah.
uh, developed. Like her parents died at a very early age, and it left her with this trauma. And just to survive, she needed some sort of mission. So she comes up with this idea of vengeance, that she's going to kill the king and she's going to kill the major who killed her parents. And it's kind of like she's Arya Starking here, but she's basically like really into uh, this idea that she's going to find these people who killed her parents, and she's going to get them justice. And so she makes certain decisions that I certainly might not have made. But if I had been in her position, I don't know. Would I have done the same thing? Perhaps, because our lives are completely different. So if she had had my life, maybe she would have done what I do. So I think it really depends on how our characters, of the situations we place our characters in, that's what affects them, and that's what changes the course of their stories through the novel. And I think that's true of life too.
My question was, one of my questions were, what were your inspirations for the gods and goddesses in your stories? And so I can tell, like, there's like a lot of cool pantheons in, obviously, in your culture. But I was wondering, what type of research did you do to have your ideas, like your sky goddess and your not Poseidon water god, and also those little moon goddesses? What did you have to do to get inspiration for those guys and all the others?
So I definitely used a lot of mythology, especially Hindu mythology, when I was developing these gods and goddesses. And I did not want the book to be a retelling of mythology, because I felt that a lot of retellings have been done of Hindu mythology, and they've been done really well by better authors. So I just wanted to play around a little bit. And so what I did was that I used many references. So the sky goddess was partially inspired by, Saraswati and Durga, and, taking ideas from those two goddesses. And then the moon goddesses were completely my own invention. I was just playing around with the idea of, having this society which was very open to love and different kinds of love, um, which is something that I had to really come up with, because India was colonized by the British, and oftentimes our history is told through that lens of colonization. So there are lots of problematic elements over there as well, like homophobia and things like that. So I was, doing some research, and I came across medieval love poetry where men were expressing their love for other men. And then I said to myself, okay, so it makes perfect sense for this kingdom, which is not colonized by foreign rule, to have an annual festival that celebrates the love of two gay goddesses. So that was something that I came up with on my own. So that myth, and I truly love it. In terms of the other characters, there are a few others which I'm not going to talk about much, because I know they'll spoil the book for people who haven't read it. But those were inspired by Persian mythology. So I am also ethnically Persian, because my ancestors came from Persia to India many years ago, and I'm part of the Parsi or Zoroastrian community. And so I really read the Shahnameh to come up with those ideas and bring them in. And just basically, I was also mixing mythologies at that point and coming up with the creatures and doing all sorts of stuff.
What was your hardest scene to write or rewrite?
Oh goodness, oh goodness. I think, okay, so I'm going to stick to the first book, because there are lots of hard scenes in the second one as well. But the first book, the hardest scene really was the twist. So, which comes towards the middle of the book, and I'm not going to spoil too much about it, but I had no idea that it was going to go that way initially when I started writing. I did not have that planned. So, when it happened, I just realized that, oh, I'd already left a few seeds in the very beginning that this is a possibility and this could happen toward the end of the book. And so that was one of the more challenging scenes, because I didn't know what I was writing initially, when I was just going in blind. And so that was also, but when it happened, it was like the best feeling ever, that, oh wow, this just happened.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, what made you decide you want to write something of that fantastical nature? Because I know you've written like more teen romance novels, like A Girl Like Her and In the Beauty of the Moment. I was wondering, what made you decide, hey, I want to write this story?
That is a wonderful question. So I really loved reading fantasy as a child. When I was 11 years old, I wrote my first ever short story, and it was about a werewolf at a girls' boarding school. And so that was my thing. I really loved reading fantasy. But a lot of the fantasy that I read that was written by Western authors. And oftentimes, when I tried to write these stories, something wouldn't work. My pixies wouldn't look like pixies, my elves wouldn't look like elves. Something was always off. So I kind of put that aside and I started writing more contemporary or realistic fiction. And so many years later, after I finished A Girl Like That in 2016, I thought to myself, I'm really bored of contemporary. I don't want to write this anymore. I want to write something different. I was still too intimidated by fantasy because I thought I couldn't do it. So I thought I'd try something more quote unquote realistic. And then I ended up with the sci-fi dystopian novel, which is truly terrible. And then I realized to myself, I really love the characters in this book, but the plot and the setting don't work. And so a friend of mine who read the book, she said, why don't you just use magic? And then I said, yeah, why don't I? What have I got to lose at this point? So I started rewriting the book with magic. And in terms of the real inspirations, I knew I wanted to write this fantasy where brown warrior women were, wielding arms and, doing magic and just being total badasses. And that's what I really wanted to do in this particular book. I was also really inspired by this group of women in India called the Gulabi Gang, and they're from North India. So right now they're a welfare organization, but they had vigilante origins. So these women would wear these pink or gulabi colored saris, and they'd go from village to village with sticks, and they like protect women who were being abused by their in-laws or their husbands and stuff like that. And it was really kind of cool. And so I thought, I'm going to write the Sisterhood of the Golden Lotus into this book. And so I just got inspired by that. In fact, Gul's name comes from Gulab or the Gulabi Gang. So I kind of, integrated both of those things in. I also just kind of was inspired by lots of women in India, especially historical women during the medieval period. There was this amazing empress called Nur Jahan. She was married to Mughal Emperor Jahangir. And she was, I think, possibly the only Mughal queen who had her name and likeness minted on a coin, which was really rare during that time period. And so I really wanted to put in women who were fighting, women with political ambition, who were not ashamed to have that political ambition. So those were some of the key inspirations of creating this book.
I was wondering if there was a hidden meaning behind your title.
Absolutely. So not too hidden, because the kingdom of Amber is basically, Amber means sky in Hindi or Sanskrit, and so basically the king of Amber represents the sky, and so he was hunting these girls, so hunted by the sky, and that's what was playing around over there.
What inspired you to become a writer? When did you realize? Was there like a specific moment when you were like, okay, I want to pursue writing, or I want to write a book?
I think the earliest possible moment was when I was 8 years old, and I was just like, my school had this annual magazine where they had like kids write poetry and stories and stuff like that. And I'm like, I just want to write a story for that, and I just wanted to do it. And that was that one key moment where I remember, wanting to do something like that. And then I started, playing around with characters and just writing stuff, imitating my favorite authors at the time. I used to read a lot of R.L. Stein and Goosebumps and Fear Street and stuff like that. So I used to imitate him. I used to read a lot of Sweet Valley, so I used to write a lot of stuff imitating that. And by the time I was 13, I knew that I wanted to write stories, but I did not really pursue writing until I was in my 20s. After university professionally, because for the longest time I was doing what most South Asian kids do. I was following a career path that my parents had laid out for me, and they said that you're going to be a chartered accountant. So I said, okay, fine, that's what I'm going to be. But I secretly still wanted to be a writer and write books. So eventually, at the end of my 4 years at university, I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply for a correspondence course for creative writing at Humber College. And I started working full time, and I also started writing part time. So that's how it began, and went into professional writing, I guess.
If a movie were to be made of your book, who would you cast as the leading roles?
Oh my God. This is such a tough question. Okay, I don't even know young people, young actors right now who can be cast. I think there needs to be a casting call, which is like open to all these young actors who actually fit into these roles because, right now the industry itself, like Hollywood at least, there's not a lot of diversity, and I want to see the actors who actually fit into these roles to be cast into them. So I guess an open casting call is absolutely necessary. And I'm guessing that you all probably know which young actors are out there right now who are good and suitable for these kinds of roles. So I'm a little old right now. I feel my age. Okay, so I think that is the end of the questions. So thank you guys for joining me. You were amazing. I totally enjoyed talking to you all.